Okay, folks, if you can take your seats. We'll start the last group of the day, and we've titled this a Fireside Chat with some of the organizers of the conference and people who have been involved with this community and industry for a number of years to discuss all the topics that we've been tossing around all day. And so here with us today are Chris Johnsen, who's a partner of Jones Walker in their Washington office. He's the head of their government relations practice group and has maintained strong ties with Congress and with the regulatory agencies in Washington. And the rest of the crew, Sophia Brown, managing director at International Registry's New York office, Marshall Islands Flag, Ryan Devine, partner at Norton Fulbright, and head of their ship finance division in the U.S., Rob Lustrin, and also with Reed Smith, partner for a number of years and also in the maritime space, and another fellow at the end, who I can never remember his name, but I think it starts with a C, Clay Maitland, managing director as well of International Registries and a stalwart of the industry. So we're here to start discussing the various issues we've been talking about all day, the dangerous world we're in. And we want to make this also a very interactive group, so please feel free to jump in with a question at any time. I think
for Clay,
to start, I thought one of the big issues that we've touched on in various ways has been maintaining the shipping lanes around the world, whether it's Ukraine, the Red Sea, the South China Sea, the Suez, the Panama Canal suddenly has become a potential point of conflict as well. How do we keep them open? And since we have Chris here, a real interesting ancillary issue is, and something Mark Kelly brought up this morning, if we could get the U.S. to have a more substantial merchant marine fleet, would that help or hurt keeping the shipping lanes open? Would the U.S. flag provide a little bit of intimidation around the world if it were substantial enough? What do you think, Chris?
Well, first of all, a pleasure to be here, and I don't need to tell this audience how chaotic and unsettled Washington is in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration. And it will be interesting to see what Mr. Trump and his team actually decide to do in the shipping sector. What is a fact is that for the last 30 or 40 years, the policy of the United States government has been to have global maritime supremacy. And I think everyone in this room knows that that is not anywhere near the case as we sit here today. The U.S. flag merchant marine has less than 100 vessels operating under the U.S. flag in international trade. There were somewhere in the neighborhood.
Compare that to the Marshall Islands, which is 5,000.
Right, and after World War II, we had roughly 2,500 U.S. flag vessels in international trade. You look at our shipbuilding base last year, or within the last couple of years, U.S. shipyards have built a grand total of 4 or 5 ocean-going ships per year. Our friends in China last year built somewhere between 1,750 and 2,000 commercial ships. It has, after years of the U.S. government sitting idly by and letting the maritime industry in the United States disintegrate, fear is a great motivator. Fear has finally set in because our friends at the Pentagon look at the overwhelming military and commercial power of China and worry terribly about whether the United States, in a direct conflict in the Pacific, Taiwan comes to mind, for example, whether the United States could sustain a military engagement for any length of time. And when you look at this issue, you always have to look at both the United States military vessels as well as commercial vessels, because of course the commercial vessels are always providing the materiel and the cargo to supply the troops. And it's a bit daunting to think that 80 to 90 U.S. flag ships are going to be able to supply the U.S. Navy in a long-term engagement with China in the Pacific, just for an example. So, not to belabor this too long, but as Senator Kelly mentioned this morning, and this was before Trump took office, there has been a bipartisan, bicameral decision made in Congress that we cannot let this situation persist. They have introduced the SHIPS Act, which some are describing as overly aggressive, but if everything that Senator Kelly is working on actually happened, we would, in the space of 20 years, have 250 U.S.-built, U.S.-flagged ships operating internationally, which, of course, would still pale in comparison to what the Chinese are doing. But it would at least significantly increase the U.S. presence around the world. And to John's comment, it would hopefully also bolster the safety of shipping lanes and routes throughout the world. I can get into more detail as we talk about what the SHIPS Act will do, but I should probably stop there and let others jump in.
Pass along to Rob. Brian, thoughts on any issue we've talked about today?
Well, I'm just a street corner attorney, but I'll add my 2 cents into this topic. First of all, Clay, congratulations on the Marlene Daniels Award today.
That was the last piece of good news. Then things went downhill.
And Marlene was quite a force of nature, so it's a true honor. In my experience dealing with ship owners, particularly many Greek-based shipping companies and ship owners, the one thing that you would ask them is what makes Greek shipping so successful? And I think the number one answer is we don't pay tax. So I think as part of the SHIPS Act, there also has to be some thinking around tax policy. I'm not sure we've gotten there yet, but there would have to be some thinking around tax policy.
As a Greek American, I would say it's more than just that.
Well, I understand, but truthfully, if we're going to participate in overseas shipping and have a level playing field and allow U.S. flag vessels to compete effectively, there needs to be a more thoughtful tax policy. I know we have a tonnage tax and things like that, but I think we need to really think about that a little bit. And I'm not sure that we've gotten quite there yet, but I'm sure that we will. Secondly, when it comes to shipbuilding, which is part of this whole mix, one of the things that makes Japanese, Korean, and more recently Chinese shipyards so effective is their know-how. And in fact, even with a lot of the economic turndown in China, for example, I believe that they are willing to build ships at very inexpensive prices in certain parts of the cycle in order to maintain the labor force and the know-how.
Subsidized.
Yeah, the know-how needs to be maintained, and I think we need to build that back up. I think we're getting to that. And the other thing would be having the inputs for all of this very close to the means of production, which again, it seems like our competitors, we have the wherewithal to do it, but I think that our competitors have been very thoughtful about planning the geographical location of means of input, workshops, shipyards, in proximity to port cities and the like. So, this really needs to be a comprehensive rethinking of the way we do things here in the United States. And I think this is a great first start. I thought that Senator Kelly's message was thoughtful and very well received.
I'm going to be a little contrarian, as Clay likes me to be on occasion. He's trained me well. Well, first of all, after
Not,
the
not well enough, but I've made
working
some,
on
we've made some progress.
Oh, you don't want to congratulate Clay on winning the award.
no. First of all, after the past couple of panels, I feel like we're compelled, and I'll do it on behalf of all of us. None of these views are our firm's; they're our own personal views. So I'm going to disclaim that. But it begs the question: I mean, do we really need to build our own ships? Do we really need to have a U.S. flag, or are we just as well going and having MSC charter in a bunch of Liberian and Marshall Islands flag vessels? I mean, it's a bit of a contrarian view, but do we really need to spend 2-3 times as much to build a ship when we could buy it from our friends in South Korea for a third of the price?
Do we,
George?
do we have confidence that say, an Eastern European crew with maybe Filipino members also in the crew would go into a war zone in a conflict, say, with North Korea or a conflict with China? The strongly held view forever in Washington has been that we need to have a U.S. flag merchant marine with U.S. citizen mariners who we can depend on when the balloon goes up to go into the war zone, and we do not have to depend on the good graces and generosity of non-U.S. owned, non-U.S. flag, non-U.S. crewed vessels to carry the fight into a foreign war theater.
Yeah, and
I also think, I agree with that, and I also think that having listened to some of the panels here today, you have a very big optimist to think that the United States is going to remain at peace for the foreseeable future. I don't believe that. And although I, maybe read a little bit too much history, I think that there is a very real possibility that we're going to get into some kind of military activity. I don't want to use terms like boots on the ground, shooting war, and so forth, but I think we are going to have to, whether Mr. Trump or anybody else thinks so, going to have to defend Taiwan, because I really do think that the People's Republic of China and President Xi himself have gone too far to turn back. They're going to have to undertake some aggressive action, I hate to tell you, in the Taiwan Straits and against Taiwan itself. Do I think it's necessarily going to go well for China? I don't think so. I think it's going to get pretty hectic and quite violent. Hopefully we're not going to have a situation like World War II or worse. But I do think that we do have to have a viable sea lift capacity, which means a U.S. flag merchant marine. Again, I may be the most pessimistic doomsayer in the room, but I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that we're going to be able to stay out of it and that there's not going to be military action. I also want to say one thing, if you permit me, John, on something that you began to speak about when you opened this panel discussion, and that is we presently are not in a position, we being the world shipping community. Now, I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about Maersk, that with all the container ships, and I'm talking particularly about something that concerns my registry, the Marshall Islands Registry, which is all the liquid natural gas carriers that are operating out of the Persian Gulf, mainly Qatar, those normally would transit, and it's a long way around the Arabian Peninsula, but they would transit the Suez Canal. They're not going to be able to do that now with the Houthis there, not with cargoes of LNG. They're going to have to go to Europe, and Germany is in a situation where it's very dependent on imported LNG, at least at the moment. They're going to have to go, those carriers, many of which are flagged in the Marshall Islands, quite frankly, and will be, we hope and believe, those are going to have to go around the what's called the COGH, the Cape of Good Hope, up the west coast of Africa, around, either into the Mediterranean if they're destined. Greece, for example, has an LNG refinery, a production facility. Some of those will end up in the Mediterranean, having gone the long way around. The others are going to go into the Baltic, of all places, to supply LNG to the rather deprived German economy, having gone out of the business of, they've shut down all of their nuclear plants. So what are they depending on? Among other things, LNG. That's a very, very long trip around, and a lot can happen during that period in not necessarily good things. I'm very concerned about that, and maybe I'm the most pessimistic guy in the room, but are we really willing to allow the present situation where the Suez Canal is, very limited? Very few people are going to be willing to use that, and certainly not the Nakilat, the Qatari natural gas government-owned company. There is another factor in this which involves money. Customarily, since the Suez Canal was built back in 1870, opened in 1869 to be exact, it's called the Suez Canal for a reason. The southern end of the Suez Canal has a town which didn't amount to very much, but now does since the advent of steam, and it's called Suez. And Suez is where ships bunker. They provision. They take on spares, they take on lubes, they do a lot of things there in Suez that now is not being done because there's very little traffic heading southbound from the Mediterranean through the canal into the Red Sea. Again, that means that where are the ships going? They're going to a place in South Africa that you've all heard of called Durban, which has also been a familiar bunkering port and supply port. They put victualling, in other words, food, everything goes on there. Well, Durban is a lot more expensive than Suez as a supply port. These things all bite. I am more pessimistic than Colonel Brown, who we heard from before the lunch break, who seemed to indicate that he thought that we could just simply ignore the Houthis and we could simply ignore the, not take any aggressive action against Yemen. My answer to that is, well, maybe the Pentagon doesn't want to do that, but I'll make a little bet with anybody in the room that the Israelis are planning to whack Yemen good and hard, and repeatedly so. They have a port, which is called Elath or Eilat, and they want to keep the Red Sea open, which isn't at the moment. I don't think, given the political situation in Israel, I'll make you a little bet. They're going to up the ante. And for maybe domestic political reasons in Israel. Don't think they wouldn't do it. I'm sorry to go on like this, but I just want to tell you that some of the assumptions we've heard today are scary, but some of the assumptions I think are overly rosy too.
Clay, let me jump in. As you may know, Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Washington as we speak, and he will be, I think, meeting with the president this afternoon. He'll be up on Capitol Hill later in the week. And by the way, I understand there's media here, so everything I'm saying I would ask is completely off the record.
I deny everything.
Too late.
but maybe it's too late.
That's on the record.
But when the attacks on the Red Sea, in the Red Sea on commercial shipping began, as you know, there were U.S. flag ships that were targeted. Luckily, none of them were hit, or maybe one was partially hit. And there was great disappointment across the U.S. flag sector that, notwithstanding the great effort that the U.S. Navy put forward to shoot many missiles out of the air that were targeting vessels, that the Biden administration did not take aggressive action to annihilate the Houthis. I don't want that quoted, please, but I'm just telling you that's what the U.S. shipping community was advocating for, because the great concern was if they could get away with this on the Red Sea, and the United States and others didn't do enough to combat it, that it was only going to incentivize other rogue actors in other sensitive areas of the world to do the same thing. I suspect, based on what we understand, that this is on Prime Minister Netanyahu's agenda to talk to President Trump about. Whether we will see an Israeli action or a more aggressive U.S. military action, I don't know, but I do agree with you, Clay, that Netanyahu and Trump are going to take a much more assertive military approach than we have seen in the past, because that area of the world is too important economically to the United States and to everybody in this room.
Traditionally, shipping has been agnostic to politics, right? We're trying to bring it back to shipping, right? Because we can talk about politics and where the world is headed. We are in a commercial business, right? We're not in a political business. And what the U.S. and the West decide to do vis-a-vis the bad actors in the world, whether it's sanctions, or maybe the new sanctions might be tariffs, or maybe other tools that are non-violent, potentially might work. But sanctions, as we discussed, that we heard from the last panel, their effectiveness is limited and maybe becoming more limited as time goes on. So the non-Western world is finding a way to work around sanctions. Shipping is forced, as Matt was discussing, that to deal with all these regulations. Now, if you see something, say something kind of thing, whether you're a P&I club or a bank or a law firm or a registry, you're supposed to know whether your customers are not very nice people. And if you don't, you can be sanctioned. So a U.S. flag potentially would keep shipping under the Western world's control, whereas whether the Liberian or Marshall Islands or other flags, Vanuatu, and Isle of Man, well, maybe not on, but other flags, not so much.
Mongolia. No, to your point though, John, there was an article in the New York Times, I believe, Wall Street Journal this week, basically saying, maybe sanctions aren't working and haven't been working, and tariffs are going to be the new sanctions. Maybe tariffs aren't such a crazy idea, and I'll leave you all to read the Wall Street Journal about that and see what you think.
Well, I'll jump in on the tariffs question. So, as I was saying to Clay earlier, whether you like President Trump or despise President Trump, the one thing that everyone needs to recognize is he pretty much does what he says he's going to do. And you might not like it, but that's the way he operates. And so he has been indicating for a very long time that he's going to impose tariffs. And what's happened in the last several days with Mexico and Canada is only going to embolden him, because he is going to say to the world that, you see, I threatened to put these tariffs in place, and Mexico and Canada within 24 hours. And there are 10,000 troops going to the border of Mexico, and we've got all of these commitments now from the Canadian government to enforce border control. He is going to impose a significant number of new tariffs. He's going to go after the EU. He is going to go after China. He is going to use the power of the U.S. economy as a blunt instrument in international trade and negotiations, and it's entirely unpredictable how it's going to turn out. Obviously, we see the Chinese did not capitulate to his imposition of tariffs, and they retaliated with even higher tariffs on U.S. goods. So we could be heading into a very ugly trade war scenario, but he feels that he has a mandate to do this. He's told the country and the world he's going to do it, and everyone needs to just, as I said to Clay, buckle up, because it's coming.
Well, I'll just add to that. First of all, just going back to your Brian's statement about perhaps building ships overseas and kind of having an overseas fleet. One of the things that always comes up is whether or not we would be in a position to requisition those vessels in the time of a crisis or conflict. And I think, again, something that we need to think about is you still need if we're going to requisition the vessels, I think Chris made a very important point about what you do about crewing those vessels and having a crew that would be, for lack of a better word, that would be loyal to the interests of the United States. So I'm not sure that requisitioning, allowing the fleet just to continue as it is being constructed outside the U.S. and relying on a requisition scenario really gets us to what I think I'm hearing where we want to be. So I don't know if Chris had any further thoughts on that one.
Does anyone,
I'm a pure capitalist. There's always a number, and
Okay, and then secondly, we were talking about sanctions, tariffs. As we can see, when some of these things are announced, rescinded, whatever the case may be, that does create some uncertainty in the capital markets. We did see some volatility in the stock market. As a capital markets attorney, I do watch some of this stuff, and I'm speaking to people in the financial community here in New York. And when there's volatility of that nature, while it may present some opportunities for traders to make some money, as far as capital raising goes, it's not the most opportunistic environment. So I think we do need to, think about how to create a more, maybe we'll see how things iron out over time. And I think we all know that the shipping industry is going to require a tremendous amount of capital infusion in order to fund fleet replenishment, as well as, getting ready for what's coming down the pike in terms of, I don't want to use the D word, but in terms of transitioning the fleet to more modern technology.
to that point, though,
Well,
where's most of that money coming from? Where's almost all of that money coming from?
I'll tell you where it's coming from, Brian. You didn't hear it this morning from the good senator from Arizona, but the SHIPS Act that he and others are supporting and that I support, and that presumably will be reintroduced, however amended, brings up the S word, which is subsidy. Where's the money going to come from? It's going to come from you and me. It's going to come from the American taxpayer. If things go sour and there's trouble, Congress and indeed the American public, remember these are the people Even if I went around the room here, I bet there's only a handful of people who probably voted Republican this last election. But I think a majority of the people in this room, and most of the people who voted for Donald Trump around the nation, would support subsidy for in one form or another. And that's the heart and soul and core of the legislation that Senator Kelly and others are putting forward. I think there's a reasonable chance that this legislation will pass in some form. I'm not saying it's going to look exactly the way this 350-page or whatever it is legislation that I tried to speed through will do, but there is enough in there. There's enough money in there, including Title 11. Remember Title 11? I think I cut my teeth on Title 11 when I became a lawyer in 1968. That's very much a possibility.
So Clay, you and I have been around long enough to remember that prior to Ronald Reagan taking office, the United States government was paying upwards to 50% of the cost of building a ship in the United States for commercial trade. It was the so-called
CDS, Congressional
Construction Differential Subsidy.
Yep.
Ronald Reagan, with one quick signature in the Oval Office, eliminated that program, and shipbuilding, as we know it in the United States, migrated to Japan, South Korea, and ultimately China. What we saw in the Biden administration, and I think you're going to see more of it in the Trump administration, is a return to what we would call industrial policy. What the Biden administration did with Republican and Democratic support is make the determination that computer chips were a matter of national security, and we should not be reliant on foreign sources for computer chips. And so they passed a bill in the hundreds of billions of dollars to subsidize and create in the United States a computer chip manufacturing industry. What we believe we're going to see with the CHIPS Act is a similar industrial policy to rebuild the U.S. maritime industry and its infrastructure. It will cost more billions than any of us want to imagine. Today, for instance, if you want to build a tanker in China, and you want to build the same, you want to get a quote for the United States shipyard for the same vessel, the numbers are staggering, but the United States cost is somewhere between 3 and 4 times, maybe even more, the cost of building that same vessel in China. And so if the CHIPS Act passes and we return to the pre-Reagan construction subsidies to get the 250 ships that Senator Kelly is pursuing, you can run the numbers pretty quickly and you get into hundreds of billions of dollars. Those who are supporting it are saying it has to be done. It's a matter of national security, and those tax dollars would be well spent. That is obviously something that reasonable people could differ over, but that's the current direction.
Yeah, I'll take the contrarian view once again for the last time, and then I'll leave it alone. We talked a little about LNG earlier and how Europe was kind of left in the cold, literally and figuratively, for LNG a couple of years back. Well, who's supplying all that LNG? I would suggest there are several very large U.S. funds that supply LNG to most of Europe and have circumvented Russia without a single one of those vessels being built in the U.S., but they're all funded and owned by companies that sit within a half a mile of this very conference room that we're sitting in right now. So I've always been of the view that the U.S. government is never going to be able to. They've shown they're completely incapable of doing it since, I guess, 1945 on, of building a fleet in the U.S., manning a fleet in the U.S., and so for whatever that's worth, I'll leave it at that. And again, questions from the audience would be great. Anybody has those questions that they've always wanted to ask Clay Maitland, Peter, this is your chance.
How long is it going to take them to build? I mean, they're slow as anything. Chinese ship will be built in 2 years, the American ship 4 years. Oh, I've done it.
So the question is, how long would it take?
Well-
Yeah.
I'm piggybacking on Brian, so.
Oh, I thought I was Don Quixote, thank you.
I think you're absolutely correct. It would take twice as long to build these ships in the United States, maybe even longer than twice, than it takes in a Chinese or South Korean or a Japanese yard. That is a matter of fact, but the question is, do we, as a country, allow our shipbuilding capability to, in effect, disappear?
We've already done that.
Well, we haven't completely done it, but we've almost done it. And what has happened in Washington in a bipartisan fashion is that there is, and we'll see what happens, but as of now, there is general agreement that allowing our shipbuilding capacity to disappear is not in the national security interests of the United States, and that we need to start somewhere, and the SHIPS Act is the first step in that direction.
To your point, has it disappeared? When was the last bulk carrier built in the States? A few tankers maybe, but when was the last bulk carrier? A couple of container ships out west for Matson. I mean, it's.
Oh, I can't disagree with you. I can,
Primarily disappeared except for somebody.
so there are roughly 14 shipyards in the United States that are capable of building a medium to a large size ocean-going vessel. There are many multiples of that, of shipyards like Avondale in Louisiana and others that have closed over the years. And as you well know, you can't just flip a switch and create a new, efficient, well-run shipyard overnight. That is all true.
When NASCO did it, they did it with Daewoo. I mean,
That all, I'm not debating that point. What the point I'm making is that all of that is true, but the policymakers, particularly those in the Pentagon, have drawn a line and said, we cannot let this get any worse, and we've got to do something, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and it will be inefficient at first, but we've got to do something. We cannot a superpower and not have the ability to project sea power all across the globe.
Go ahead.
Yeah, a question for Chris. The SHIPS Act has a cargo requirement in it. So I think it's, over a period of years, 10% of U.S. imports from China, so containerized, 10% of U.S. exports of oil, and then over a period of time, long period of time, 15% of U.S. exports of LNG. And so that would go on U.S.-made ships. And I assume that the freight rates would be much higher, or should be higher than the, you don't know.
I don't assume that.
But I mean, how important is the cargo requirement to the success of the bill?
So today, roughly 99.5% of the cargo moving in and out of U.S. ports moves on foreign flag vessels. The largest shippers in the United States, whether it's Walmart, Target, name your significant shipper, moves their cargo on foreign flag vessels. It is unrealistic to assume that the United States can build all these beautiful new vessels, put a U.S. flag on, and suddenly cargo is going to fall out of the sky, and these commercial vessels are suddenly going to be full, moving full loads of cargo.
Not to mention economically viable.
Again, there will be those who don't like this, but in addition to the construction subsidy, there will be an operating subsidy. And the purpose of that operating subsidy, combined with the capital subsidy, is to put the U.S. owner, the U.S. shipping line, at a competitive position vis-a-vis foreign carriers who are building their ships abroad at a much cheaper price and with much lower wage scales for their crew. But even then, the expectation is that the cargo won't flow to U.S. flag vessels unless there are additional incentives. So there are, in addition to what you've talked about, there's under discussion investment tax credits for those who invest in the U.S. flag. There are tax credits under discussion for shipping Americans so that a U.S. flag company could go to using Walmart again and say, you know, you will theoretically get a 10% tax credit to ship American. And so there are all of these types of things that are under discussion because the whole SHIPS Act falls under its own weight if the ships are not commercially viable once they're built and in operation. So there's a lot of focus on making sure that there is commercial cargo available for these vessels. There is not enough U.S. government cargo to support a fleet of 250 U.S. flag vessels, so they're going to have to be commercially viable.
So that you'd have to get the energy lobby to not go against this because they're concerned about, you know, the added cost or the availability of the U.S. built ships.
Well, the expectation is that the energy lobby would be supportive because they could move their cargo on U.S. flag ships at or below the cost that they're currently moving their cargo on foreign flag ships.
Perfect example, again, I lied. I'll take one more contrarian view here. Under Trump 1, there was a fleeting moment where the unions hadn't spoken to Trump yet about the Jones Act. And he came out one afternoon and said something to the effect of, what's this Jones Act thing we're talking about? It sounds ridiculous to me. That got shut down within about 24 hours. He was schooled very quickly, perhaps incorrectly in my view. Within that 24-hour period, I had another U.S. fund worth hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, that called me and said, hold on. I own all these LNG carriers. Why can't I carry cargo from the Gulf of America or Louisiana? Why can't I carry cargo from a U.S. port to Puerto Rico? Because LNG is really expensive in Puerto Rico, and I'm a U.S. guy, and I own all these ships, and why can't I do this? I don't understand. So again, I pose the question, are we creating regulation that doesn't need to be created because we already have a solution? We have U.S.-owned ships that are supplying LNG to all of Europe right now and have saved their hides for the past few years. We have more money in New York. My partners in London think it's incredible when they come here, and they meet with the private equity funds. And they said it's just eye-opening. In London, if you can raise $100 million here or there, that's really good. It's nice. They're happy. They come here and people are throwing billions of dollars around at a shot.
That's right.
Well, Maersk is a Danish company with extensive commercial traffic to the United States. Now, if the Danes would just let us have Greenland, we, and this is very much the way Mr. Trump's mind works. He's very transactional. Here's the deal. We'll leave the Maersk alone, and they can actually do whatever they want to do, and we're not going to throw tariffs at them, and we're not going to do this. But we got to have Greenland, and probably at least one island in the Baltic. It doesn't have to be Bornholm. If you know your geography, there are a couple of nice Danish islands which we could become part of the United States. We bought the Virgin Islands from Denmark in 1917. Let's get some more Danish territory, and Maersk can go on, you get the picture.
And they can all move it to the Panama Canal whenever they want.
And we can buy butter cookies and butter and all the other good things that they produce in
And we
Denmark.
can ship them LNG fuel from the Gulf of America.
Exactly. So you see, there's a way to make all this work, ladies and gentlemen.
Anybody worried about the dollar? It was discussed previously. I think it was Eve Coffey who raised the question of the viability, long-term?
It's too expensive.
Any, no concerns?
Makes it for nice European holidays.
Any other questions out there? One of the big issues that's been a big topic of virtually every shipping conference the last few years has been sustainability. It wasn't really on our radar today, but does it have a role in the dangerous world we've been living in?
Well, I think we did hit that tangentially, although not straight on the head. You know, we did have a very nice panel earlier on that was speaking about the environmental impact on shipping. And I think the point was made in that panel that, you know, we are proceeding on as I had mentioned earlier, we are proceeding on a trajectory toward zero carbon, and it seems, you know, somewhat unstoppable, if not in the short term, you know, looking at a long-term view over a number of decades forward, this is going to, you know, have to happen. We can all have a debate over whether the current timeline is feasible. But it seems like that's going to happen, and I know that we did hear.
We need the technology people to help there as well,
Right, yeah,
right? I mean,
certainly.
need a lot of electricity to make it sustainable, and we still need oil and gas or coal to create it.
And uranium.
And you're right. Exactly.
Precious metal, coming from Ukraine now.
Right. The minister, one of the ministers in South Africa said King Coal is back. Did you see that the other day? So he's pushing for coal. It's a big part of their economy. I mean, the way we think of large potential drivers of the economy, that's for them. That's a big deal.
Yeah, no, that was, Trump said yesterday, rare earth metals are Ukraine's biggest asset, and we're going to take security as well as for the hundreds of billions of dollars we're giving Ukraine.
Piracy is back, ladies and gentlemen, on a big scale. Grab what you can.
Any more questions? Thirsty crowd.
Oh, wait, we got one.
Just one question on the CHIPS Act. Do you think, given the disparity between America and its peers, that the CHIPS Act is ambitious enough, or do you think it meets the needs of the country right now?
Well, at the risk of starting another debate.
No, I'm not going to say anything more.
No, I don't think it's ambitious enough, to be perfectly honest, because, as I said earlier, if we achieve the goals that Senator Kelly has set out of, in 20 years, building 250 commercially viable U.S. flag vessels that are operating in international trade, at 250 vessels, we will still be way down the list. Clay will have lots more vessels, obviously, under Marshall Islands flag. But to my earlier point, I think the policymakers in Washington have decided they have to do something. They can just not sit idly by and allow this situation to continue. One other thing I'll mention to you, which I just give you a couple of other numbers which I hadn't mentioned earlier. Today, the Chinese Navy has 370 ships. The U.S. Navy has 300. So, round figures. So, not only have the Chinese surpassed us in shipbuilding capability and the number of merchant ships that they control on the oceans of the world, but they now have significantly outbuilt us in terms of our Navy. And you put all of that together and look at that from a national security standpoint, it's just not ultimately sustainable. So we need to do a lot more, and we need to do it as fast as possible. At least that's the view in the Pentagon.
I remember Reagan talking about a 600-ship Navy, right? Whatever
Yes.
happened to that?
When the Hawks demand the Navy be replenished first, before even looking at the commercial ships, that's going to be target one, no?
There's no doubt that that there is a parallel intense focus in Washington on building more naval ships for the Navy. No doubt about that. But the current view is they have to do both at the same time. We'll see if it happens.
Yeah, see what happens is right. I mean, that takes a lot of will.
And money.
Yeah.
Well, apparently,
They can find the
when
money.
we don't have the USAID and the Department of Education and all of these other things, we'll have all this extra money that will be available.
Yeah.
Yes. And we'll get all the Panama Canal revenues, so yes.
One thing that I think is missing in all of this, I heard at a conference recently that the average age of a shipyard worker in the U.S. is 60 plus. Jones Act is slightly older than I am. So the point is, and I haven't read anything as much as the panelists have, I think the missing link in all this is great, but we need to start with the education side of things and get shipworking to be cool and get working out at sea to be cool and all this other stuff. Because I think there's a giant thing in this industry, especially in the U.S., is sea blindness. The only time that people care about shipping is when they can't get toilet paper on Walmart or they happen to watch, the Today Show or whatever you're watching and there's a ship sideways in the Suez Canal. That's the only time people give a crap, even though you look outside, you're like, oh, there's really cool stuff going on. So I think part of the stuff about cutting part of education is kind of sad because we could use that as a feeder to get people, because it's not going to happen overnight to learn how to weld. Even if you bring some of that in, like Hanwha just invested in Philly Shipyard, bringing some of that technology, I think we're really missing a giant piece, and that's education. For the record, I went to SUNY, even for GP, or all the other schools. I think there's a boon for that that's missing in
So,
this discussion.
so I didn't focus on that, but probably 100 of the 350 pages of the Ships Act focuses exactly on that issue.
That has to be.
Because the view is we obviously have a mariner shortage today with the paltry merchant marine that we have. We can barely crew the ships that we currently have. To go to 250, we're going to have to greatly increase the maritime education opportunities across the country. The Kelly Ships Act would invest heavily in the state maritime academies, heavily at Kings Point. I believe, if I recall correctly, it even would fund some new maritime academies. And it is obviously extremely challenging to get folks who will go to work in a shipyard or who will want to go work on a ship and be away from home when there are all these other opportunities available in the United States, and we're pretty much at full employment. So it's a challenge, but it is not being overlooked, and it's a big focus of the Kelly bill.
I'm glad to hear that, my ignorance, but I think also the other part is just kind of getting the word out there that this is a kind of an interesting industry, that, you can start one place and go something else. But I also think instead of the schools, instead of just the schools, obviously some more of the trade schools, like it's okay not to be as cool as Brian Devine, being a lawyer who's contrarian, who's, talking to billion-dollar funds. Like, it's okay.
Son of a merchant mariner.
I'm giving you a hard time, Brian.
Son of other things too.
No, I didn't say that. But I also think there is something, and this goes into a structural thing of, hey, it's okay if you want to learn how to be an operator, of a machinery operator, things like that at a shipyard, because it is a vital part and you can have a sustainable career there. And I think hopefully that's part of it as well, not just all the state schools, which I benefited from, but technical and other type of resources as well, because I think that's going to be critical.
As you may know, the cell phone has been a big problem because most young kids who are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their life when they found out that they might get out to sea and they wouldn't be able to use their almighty phone, said, well, they would go in a different direction. Elon Musk, of course, has Starlink, and many, if not most of the ships now have signed up for Starlink, and so we now can tell our recruits, you can use your phone anywhere in the world on a ship.
Right, is connectivity, that's a huge part of it, and then you get into a whole discussion on how do you limit it, do you limit it, how do you treat all that in terms of safety and everything, which is a giant thing. But I do think connectivity is a major part and something that's going to help this industry. But I'm also talking more about the shipbuilding side of things, where you can go home, where you can have access. I think it's been less sexy over the last few years, but I do think there needs to be a focus and a little bit of a mind shift. Like, this is a great way to earn a living and to kind of contribute.
Last thing I'll say, and then I promise I'll shut up. The Kelly bill also provides funding for a nationwide advertising campaign to recruit folks to come into the industry. So that would be part of this overall comprehensive effort to rebuild the human infrastructure of the industry.
Anyway, thank you, everybody. This was fantastic. Just to close things up, and I will obviously let John have the last word here. But this was a great day. I just wanted to thank everyone who participated in the panels. We spoke about commercial issues. We spoke about technical issues, political issues. This was so comprehensive and at such a high level. I'm really honored to be part of the panel up here.
We all are.
Our fine group of peers.
Well said. Well said.
I'd like to thank everyone. Nice round of applause. John.
Or no?
So thanks, everyone, for being here today, and thanks to our Fireside Chat panelists for closing out the conference. I think the general takeaways from today are that everything is weaponized, everything is unpredictable. Be afraid, be very afraid. But I think it's actually a lot more of an optimistic outlook than that. I think what we see in this room here today and what we're hearing is that, yes, markets are volatile. They've always been. But shipping is still going. Ships are still being built. We're still flagging vessels. And we're all still trudging ahead. So whether the sanctions and tariffs change day by day and shipping routes have to change, we're sticking through it. And one of the things that I thought was interesting that we spoke about today, which we haven't really touched upon in this conference before, was technology and AI and how that's going to play into the future of shipping. And one of our panelists on that panel mentioned that out of 1,500 companies, AI companies that he met with, only 50 of them were in shipping. And I think that's a pretty interesting figure. I think that we should start to hear from those people more. We should get them in the room. We should hear what AI can do for shipping and try to adapt a little more, gain that trust that they were discussing, and we'll see what the future holds there. So thanks, everyone, for a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next year.